"I don't trust anyone," she said. The mafia boss replied. "Then just trust my hands." Tonight, Northbridge was the kind of neighborhood that swallowed people whole, and Raina Cole had spent 24 years learning how to keep herself from going down its throat. The city lights here did not sparkle. They hummed with a sickly, electric buzz, flickering over wet pavement and broken shop windows. It was 3 a.m, the dead hour, when the only people awake were the ones looking for trouble or the ones trying to hide from it. Raina stood behind the scarred oak bar of the Rusty Anchor, wiping down the counter with a rag that smelled of bleach and stale beer. She moved with a mechanical efficiency, her eyes fixed on the grain of the wood. If she looked up, she might have to make eye contact with the 3 regulars slumped over their loggers at the far end of the room, and eye contact invited conversation. Conversation invited questions. And Raina had no interest in answering questions about where she came from, why she flinched when a door slammed, or why a girl with a face like hers was wasting away in a dive bar on the wrong side of the tracks. "You okay there, Raina?" She stiffened, her shoulders rising toward her ears before she could stop them. Stan, the barback, had come up behind her to restock the ice bin. He was close enough that she could smell the cigarette smoke clinging to his flannel shirt. He reached out, his hand hovering near her upper arm in a gesture meant to be friendly, meant to be comforting. Raina took a sharp step back, her hip checking the corner of the well speed rack. The rag in her hand stopped moving. She did not look at him, but her voice came out sharp, like glass snapping under a boot. "I am fine. Stan, just tired." "You jumped a mile," Stan said, dropping his hand. He looked hurt, but Raina did not soften. She could not afford to soften. Softness was a crack in the armor, and the foster system had taught her that cracks were where the cold got in. And after the foster homes, the man she had dated 2 years ago had taught her that cracks were where the pain got in. "I am fine," she repeated, the lie practiced and smooth on her tongue. "Just finish the ice so we can close up." She went back to wiping the counter, scrubbing at a stubborn, sticky ring of bourbon until her knuckles turned white. She kept everyone at arm's length. It was the only way she knew how to breathe. If they could not touch you, they could not hurt you. It was a simple rule, one that had kept her alive since she was 16 and packing her life into garbage bags every 6 months. The bell above the front door chimed. It was not the lazy jingle of a regular stumbling in for a nightcap. The door opened firmly and closed with a solid thud. The air in the room shifted instantly. The low murmur of the television in the corner seemed to grow louder as the conversation at the far end of the bar died out completely. Raina looked up. 4 men had walked in. They did not belong in Northbridge. They wore suits that cost more than the building Raina was standing in. Charcoal wool, tailored shoulders, crisp white collars that stood out against the dim, amber lighting of the bar. They moved with a predatory grace, taking up space without asking for it. 3 of them spread out, checking the corners, their eyes scanning the room with the bored detachment of soldiers on patrol. But the 4th man walked straight to the center of the bar. He was tall, with broad shoulders that filled out his suit in a way that suggested raw power beneath the expensive fabric. His hair was dark, swept back from a face that was handsome in a severe, classical way, like a statue carved from marble that had been left out in a storm. He took the stool directly in front of Raina. He did not smile. He simply looked at her. "Whiskey," he said. His voice was low, a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through the wood of the counter. "Neat. Top shelf." Raina reached for the bottle of reserve bourbon they kept for the rare big spender, her hand trembling slightly. She hated that she was shaking. She hated that his presence made the air feel thin, as if he were sucking the oxygen out of the room just by existing. She poured the drink, careful not to spill a drop, and slid the glass toward him. $10, she said, keeping her gaze on the register. The man placed a $20 bill on the counter. He did not slide it. He placed it, deliberately, smoothing it flat with 2 fingers. That was when Raina saw his hands. They were large hands, capable and heavy, but across the knuckles of his right hand, the skin was split and bruised, blooming in ugly shades of purple and black. The injury looked fresh, raw, a violent contrast to the pristine cuff of his shirt and the gold watch gleaming on his wrist. Raina stared for a second too long. When she looked up, she found him watching her, watching him. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and terrifyingly calm. They were not the eyes of a drunk looking for a fight. They were the eyes of a man who ended fights before they began. "Rough night?" she asked, the words slipping out before she could stop them. She instantly regretted it. The man took a sip of his whiskey, the crystal glass looking fragile in his grip. He set it down without a sound. "Business," he said. "It has been a long week." He leaned forward slightly, the movement smooth, like a panther adjusting its weight on a branch. The scent of him hit her. Sandalwood, expensive tobacco, and the metallic tang of something sharp and cold. "You are shaking," he observed. It was not a question. Raina hid her hands beneath the bar, curling them into fists against her apron. "It is cold in here. It is 70 degrees in here," he countered softly. He took another sip, his gaze never leaving her face. It felt invasive, as if he were cataloging every scar she carried, every fear she had buried. "You should not be working alone this late. Not in this neighborhood." "I can handle myself," Raina said, lifting her chin. It was the same thing she told Stan. The same thing she told herself every night when she walked to the bus stop with her keys laced through her fingers as a makeshift weapon. "I'm sure you can," the man said. There was no mockery in his tone, only a dry, terrifying seriousness. "But there are things in this city that a lock on the door cannot keep out." Before Raina could reply, the silence of the street outside was shattered. It started with shouting, rough, desperate voices screaming over one another. Then came the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. Crack. Raina flinched, dropping the rag. Crack, crack, crack. Glass exploded inward as the front window of the bar shattered, sending shards raining down onto the empty tables. "Get down!" The command did not come from Raina's brain. It came from the man in the suit. One of his guards had already launched himself forward, shoving the man off the stool and toward the floor, covering him with his own body. But Raina stood frozen, her mind stuttering, unable to process the sudden eruption of violence. The man on the floor, Adrian, though she did not know his name yet, looked up. He did not look fearful. He looked annoyed. He shoved his bodyguard aside with a strength that seemed impossible for his position and locked eyes with Raina. "Get down, now!" he roared, the gentleman facade cracking just enough to reveal the warlord beneath. Raina scrambled backward, her boots slipping on the wet floor mats. She dove behind the heavy oak bar, curling into a ball near the sinks. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Outside. The gunfire continued, a chaotic exchange between rival crews, the heavy thump-thump of larger calibers mixing with the popping of handguns. "Secure the back!" she heard Adrian shout. His voice was calm again, cutting through the noise like a blade. "Do not let them flank us." "Boss, we need to move," another voice urged. "Not yet. Watch the glass." Raina pressed her hands over her ears, squeezing her eyes shut. 1, 2, 3, she counted silently. A trick a social worker had taught her years ago. Just survive the next 10 seconds, then the next 10. Suddenly, a hand grabbed her arm. Raina screamed, lashing out blindly. She struck solid muscle. "Easy," a rough voice growled. It was one of the guards, a man with a scar running through his eyebrow. He was crouching behind the bar with her. "Boss says we move to the office. This place is a fishbowl. Don't touch me." Raina snapped, jerking her arm away with a ferocity that surprised the man. She scrambled backward, hitting the liquor bottles on the speed rail. "Do not touch me." "Let her walk." Adrian's voice came from the end of the bar. Raina looked up. He was crouched low, moving toward the back hallway. He had a gun in his hand now, a sleek, black pistol that he held with the same casual familiarity as the whiskey glass. He was not looking at her. He was watching the shattered front window, waiting for a target. "Go to the office," Adrian said to her, not shouting, but with a weight that demanded obedience. "Stay low. Go." Raina didn't argue. She crawled, her knees scraping against the rubber mats, scrambling toward the narrow hallway that led to the manager's office. The guards herded the few terrified customers in with her, inside the cramped office. Raina backed into the farthest corner, grabbing a letter opener from the desk. She held it out, her chest heaving. The guards ignored her, taking positions at the door, weapons drawn. "I do not trust you," she hissed at the nearest man, her voice trembling. "I do not trust men with guns." The guard glanced at her, unimpressed. "You better hope you trust us enough to keep those bullets outside." The shooting stopped as abruptly as it had begun. The sound of tires screeching against asphalt faded into the distance, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. Raina slid down the wall, her legs giving out. She sat on the dusty floor, clutching the letter opener, waiting for the police sirens. They never came. 10 minutes passed, 20. The silence stretched, heavy and unnatural. Finally, the door opened. Adrian stepped in. He had holstered his weapon and straightened his jacket, except for a dusting of drywall powder on his shoulder. He looked as pristine as he had when he walked in. He looked at the customers huddled by the file cabinets, then nodded to his men. "Get them out the side exit. Give them 500 each for the inconvenience. Tell them it was a robbery gone wrong." The guards ushered the confused regulars out. Adrian turned to Raina. She stood up slowly, keeping the desk between them. "You are hurt," he said, gesturing to her cheek. Raina touched her face and pulled her fingers away, bloody. A small shard of glass had nicked her. "I am fine," she said automatically. "You're not fine," Adrian corrected. "That was a hit, a clumsy one, likely low-level dealers fighting over territory. But they shot up your bar." "It is not my bar," Raina said. "I just work here." "And now you are a witness," Adrian said. He stepped closer, and Raina took a step back, her back hitting the wall. He stopped immediately, respecting the distance. "Listen to me. The police are not coming. Whoever staged that little show paid them off to look the other way for 20 minutes, but they will circle back. And the people who did this? They might wonder who saw their faces." "I didn't see anything," Raina said quickly. "They do not know that," Adrian replied. "My car is out back. I can take you home, ensure you get there safely." Raina laughed, a sharp, hysterical sound. "Get in a car with you? I don't even know who you are." "My name is Adrian," he said, "and I am the safest option you have right now." "No," Raina said, shaking her head. "No way. I call my own cab. I go home alone. I handle myself." Adrian studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. He seemed to be weighing her defiance against her vulnerability. Finally, he nodded. "Very well," he said, "but do not wait here. Leave now. Go out the back." He turned and walked out, his men falling in line behind him like shadows. Raina waited until they were gone before she grabbed her purse and coat. She was shaking so hard she could barely zipper the jacket. She didn't call a cab. She couldn't afford one. Not really. And the wait time in Northbridge was over an hour. She would walk to the main avenue and catch the night bus. She slipped out the heavy steel back door into the alley behind the bar. The air was freezing, biting at her exposed skin. The alley was dark, piled with damp cardboard boxes and trash bags. Raina moved quickly, her keys protruding from her fist. "Just get to the streetlights," she told herself. "Just get to the lights." She heard the scrape of a shoe on pavement behind her. Raina spun around, but she was too slow. A figure lunged from the shadows, a man in a ski mask and a dark hoodie. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for her purse. He went straight for her body. His hand clamped over her mouth, tasting of leather and sweat. His other arm hooked around her waist, lifting her off her feet. Raina tried to scream, the sound dying in her throat. She kicked out, her boot connecting with a shin, but the man just grunted and tightened his grip, dragging her backward toward a sedan idling at the mouth of the alley with its lights off. Panic, white-hot and blinding, exploded in her brain. It was happening again, the helplessness, the overpowering strength of a man who wanted to hurt her. She thrashed, clawing at the hand over her face. "Shut up, bitch," the man hissed in her ear. "You're coming with us." Suddenly, the man stopped moving. There was no sound of a struggle, no shout of warning. The man simply jerked violently, a choked gasp escaping him. A hand, large, strong, and terrifyingly familiar, clamped onto the attacker's wrist, the one holding Reyna. With a sickening crunch, the hand twisted, the attacker howled, his grip on Reyna loosening instantly. Adrian was there. He stood in the gloom of the alley, his suit jacket gone, his white shirt glowing in the moonlight. He did not look frantic. He looked clinical. He yanked Reyna free with his left hand, pulling her behind him, while his right hand, the one with the bruised knuckles, stayed locked on the attacker. The masked man tried to swing a knife with his free hand. Adrian caught the blow mid-air, blocking it with his forearm, then drove his knee into the man's gut. The attacker doubled over. Adrian brought his elbow down on the back of the man's neck. The man hit the pavement face first and did not move. The car at the end of the alley screeched its tires and sped away, abandoning their comrade. Silence returned to the alley, heavy and thick. Reyna stood pressed against the brick wall, her chest heaving, her eyes wide. She stared at the man on the ground, then at Adrian. He was adjusting his cufflinks. He looked up at her. His breathing even. He checked the alley, verified the threat was gone, and then walked toward her. Reyna flinched, shrinking back against the bricks. Stay away. Adrian stopped 3 feet away. He held up his hands, palms open. I'm not going to touch you. You killed him, she whispered. He is unconscious, Adrian said. He will wake up with a headache in an hour. By then, we will be gone. He took off his suit jacket. He moved slowly, broadcasting every motion so she wouldn't startle. He held the jacket out to her. Put this on, he said. You are in shock. Reyna looked at the jacket, then she looked at his hands. The knuckles were bleeding now, fresh red mixing with the old purple bruises. Violence. Those hands were made of violence, just like the man on the ground, just like her ex. I can't, she stammered. I don't know you. I don't trust anyone. Adrian took a half step closer. He did not force the jacket on her. He just held it there, a shield between her and the cold world. His eyes softened. Just a fraction. It was the first time she had seen anything other than calculation in them. You don't trust anyone, he repeated, his voice low and rough, like gravel over velvet. I get it. In your shoes, I wouldn't either. He looked down at his own hands, flexing the fingers slightly, acknowledging the blood, the bruises, the damage he had inflicted seconds ago. Then he looked back at her, his gaze intense and unwavering. But let my hands keep you alive tonight. Reyna stared at him. Her heart was still racing, beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Every instinct she had honed over a lifetime of survival screamed at her to run. Run from the suit, run from the blood, run from the power he radiated. But another part of her, a part that was tired, so incredibly tired of fighting the world alone, felt a strange, terrifying pull. He had stood between her and the bullets. He had pulled her out of the dark. He had stopped when she said stop. Where? She whispered. I have a place, Adrian said. Secure. No one knows about it, just for tonight. Until the heat dies down and I can figure out who put a mark on you. Reyna looked at the unconscious man on the ground, then at the dark, empty street where the bus would never come in time. She looked at Adrian's hands again. They were steady. They were waiting. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she reached out and took the jacket. It was heavy, warm, and smelled of sandalwood and safety. She pulled it around her shoulders. It swallowed her small frame. Okay, she said, the word barely more than a breath. Just for tonight, Adrian nodded. Once, he did not smile. He did not offer a comforting platitude. He simply turned and led the way to a sleek black car parked around the corner, shielding her body with his own as they walked. As she sat in the back seat of the car, the leather soft beneath her, Reyna watched Adrian in the rearview mirror. He was driving, his hands resting calmly on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. She pulled his jacket tighter around herself, trying to stop the shivering. She stared at those hands. They were beautiful, in a brutal sort of way, elegant and destructive. She knew she was making a mistake. She knew she was stepping into a world she didn't understand, a world of men who solved problems by breaking bones. But as the city lights blurred past the window, streaking the glass with neon rain, Raina realized something that terrified her more than the attack in the alley. For the first time in her life, she felt safe, and that was the most dangerous thing of all. The elevator ride to the penthouse took long enough for the pressure in Raina's ears to pop twice. It was a silent, hermetically sealed box of polished steel and mirrors, reflecting two people who looked like they belonged in entirely different universes. Adrian stood near the doors, his posture relaxed but alert, the blood on his knuckles now dried to a rust color against his skin. Raina stood in the back corner, her arms crossed tight over her chest, wearing a jacket that cost more than her rent and smelled like the man who had just dismantled a human being in an alleyway. When the doors slid open, they revealed an apartment that looked less like a home and more like a fortress of glass and concrete. The entire far wall was a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city of Northbridge. From this height, the grime and the danger were invisible, reduced to a grid of amber streetlights and red taillights bleeding into the darkness. "Go inside," Adrian said, holding the elevator door open with his forearm. Raina hesitated, then stepped over the threshold. The air inside was cool and smelled of nothing. No dust, no food, no life. It was a sterile, high-altitude sanctuary. "Why here?" Raina asked, her voice sounding thin in the cavernous living room. She turned to face him as the elevator doors whispered shut, sealing them in. "Why not a hotel? Why not the police station?" Adrian walked past her, tossing his keys onto a marble console table. The sharp clatter made Raina flinch, because hotels have guest registries and staff who talk for $50, Adrian said, walking toward the kitchen area. He began to unbutton his cuffs, his movements methodical. "And the police station is the first place my enemies will look for a witness. If they find you there, you will never make it to a deposition." Raina watched him, her back pressed against the nearest wall. "So I am just leverage now? A loose end you are trying to tie up?" Adrian stopped. He turned slowly, his expression serious. "You are not a loose end. Raina, you are a civilian who got caught in the crossfire of a war you did not start. They think you saw something. They think you can identify the shooter. Until I convince them otherwise, you are a target." "I told you," she snapped, the fear making her defensive. "I didn't see anything. I don't know anything." "It does not matter what is true," Adrian said softly. "It matters what they believe." He gestured toward the kitchen. "I have tea. Coffee, water. You look like you're about to collapse. Sit down." "I will stand," Raina said. "I don't trust you. I don't trust this place. And I definitely don't trust men who control everything." Adrian's lips quirked in a humorless line. "Fair enough. But you can mistrust me while holding a cup of tea. There is a kettle on the counter. Chamomile is in the cupboard above it. It helps with the shock." He turned his back on her, walking toward the living room window to make a call on a second, burner phone he pulled from his pocket. He was giving her space. Raina knew it was a tactic, but her body was screaming for the reprieve. She walked into the kitchen. It was spotless. The counters made of dark slate. She found the electric kettle and filled it at the sink, her movements jerky. She set it on the base and clicked the switch. While she waited, the adrenaline that had sustained her in the alley began to drain away, leaving a hollow, shaking weakness in its wake. She stared at her hands. They were trembling so violently that she had to grip the edge of the counter to steady them. Her breath started coming in short, shallow gasps. The image of the masked man in the alley played on a loop in her mind, the leather of his glove over her mouth, the feeling of being dragged backward. The kettle clicked off. Raina reached for the handle to pour the water, but her grip failed. The heavy kettle wobbled, hot water splashing over the rim, nearly scalding her. She gasped, dropping it back onto the base with a loud clang. Before the sound had even faded, Adrian was there. She hadn't heard him cross the room. He moved with a silence that was unnatural for a man of his size. He didn't grab her. He didn't scold her. He simply reached out and placed his large hand over hers on the kettle's handle. His skin was warm. His grip was steady, encompassing her shaking fingers completely. "Breathe," he said. His voice was right by her ear, low and rumbling. "I can't," Raina whispered, staring at their hands, his bruised and battered, hers pale and trembling. "I can't stop shaking." "Yes, you can," Adrian murmured. "Do not fight it. Just ground yourself. Feel the floor under your boots. Feel the cold of the slate counter against your hip. Feel my hand." He didn't pull away. He held her hand there, not trapping it, but acting as a counterweight to her tremors. "Count with me," he instructed. "In for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it. Now out." Raina closed her eyes. The heat radiating from him was a physical force, burning through the layers of her fear. She focused on the roughness of his thumb where it rested against her knuckle. "Again," he said. "In for 4. She breathed. She counted. And slowly, the erratic thumping of her heart began to sync with the steady rhythm of his voice. The shaking in her hands subsided, absorbed by the stillness of his hold. "Better?" he asked after a long moment. "A little," she admitted, opening her eyes. Adrian gently squeezed her hand once, then released her. He poured the water into 2 mugs with steady precision, never spilling a drop. He handed one to her. "Drink," he said. "Then we talk." They moved to the living room. Raina sat on the edge of a gray sofa, holding the mug like a shield. Adrian sat in an armchair opposite her, keeping a respectful distance. Outside, the weather was turning. The wind battered the glass, and heavy clouds were swallowing the city lights. A sudden sharp bang echoed from the hallway, perhaps a door slamming in the draft or the building settling in the wind. Raina flinched violently, tea sloshing over the rim of her mug. She curled in on herself, her knees coming up to her chest instinctively. Adrian watched the reaction, his eyes narrowing not in judgment, but in assessment. "Reflex," he noted quietly. "You expect pain when you hear loud noises." "I am fine," Raina lied, setting the mug down on the coffee table with a clatter. "You are not," Adrian said. He stood up. "Stand up, Raina." "Why?" She eyed him warily. "Because you are terrified," he said bluntly. "And fear makes you freeze. If someone comes at you again, you cannot freeze. You need to know you can do something other than wait for it to be over." "I know how to run," she said. "Running is good," Adrian agreed. "But sometimes there is nowhere to go. Stand up." Reluctantly, Raina stood. Adrian moved around the coffee table. "I am going to show you how to break a hold. Just one move. Simple, effective." He walked behind her. Raina tensed, her shoulders hunching. Every alarm bell in her head rang at the sensation of a man standing directly behind her, out of her line of sight. "Relax," Adrian's voice came from over her shoulder. "I'm going to place my hands on your wrists. Is that okay?" "Yes," she whispered, though her throat was tight. He reached out. His palms settled on her wrists, his fingers wrapping lightly around the bones. He guided her arms down to her sides. "If someone grabs you from behind," he explained, "your instinct is to pull forward, away from them. That is wrong. That is a battle of strength, and you will lose." He stepped closer. His chest brushed her back. Raina stopped breathing. She could feel the hard wall of his torso, the heat of him seeping through her clothes. He was so big, so solid. He could crush her without trying. "Instead," he murmured, his breath stirring the hair near her ear, "you step back. You step into them. You use your hips to create space, and you drop your weight." He guided her movements, his touch clinical but firm. He moved her leg back with his foot, positioning her. He adjusted the angle of her elbows. I can't," Raina stammered. Her heart was stuttering, skipping beats. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was a hyper-awareness of him. The smell of sandalwood, the roughness of his palms, the absolute control he had over his own body, and by extension, hers. "You are doing it," Adrian said. "Now, twist your wrists toward the thumbs. That is the weak point of any grip." He tightened his hold slightly, not enough to hurt, just enough to simulate a capture. "Twist," he commanded softly. Raina tried, but her focus was fractured. She was overwhelmed by the sensory input of him. "It is too much," she breathed. "Tell me if it is too much," Adrian said immediately. his voice dropping an octave, becoming an intimate rumble in the quiet room. "I stop when you say, 'Stop,'" Raina said. It was barely a whisper. He released her instantly. He didn't hesitate. He didn't linger. His hands vanished from her wrists, and he took a full step back, putting 2 feet of air between them. Raina spun around, her chest heaving. She looked at him, searching for frustration or anger in his face. She found neither. He was simply watching her, his hands open at his sides. "You stopped," she said, sounding surprised. "I told you I would." Adrian said, "I am not him, Raina. Whoever taught you that, your voice does not matter." He was a liar. The words hit her harder than a physical blow. Raina turned away, walking to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. She needed to cool the heat in her cheeks. "My ex," she said to the glass, her voice flat. "He liked to play games. He liked to make me say stop so he could laugh and keep going. He said it was just roughhousing. He said I was too sensitive." She waited for Adrian to defend the unknown man, to say that maybe she was remembering it wrong. "He sounds like a man who needed to feel big by making someone else feel small," Adrian said from the center of the room. His voice was laced with a cold, lethal disgust. "A weak man." Raina turned back to face him. The room was darker now, the storm outside blotting out the moon. "And you? You are a strong man?" "I am a dangerous man," Adrian corrected. He walked over to the sofa and sat down. Looking tired, "There is a difference." Raina moved back to the sofa, sitting on the opposite end. The darkness made it easier to speak. It felt like a confessional. "The system wasn't any better," she said, picking at a loose thread on the cushion. "Foster homes, 5 of them in 4 years. You learn quickly that adults only want you around when you are quiet and convenient. If you have needs, if you have fears, you get sent back. So you lie. You say you are fine. You say you are happy. You trust no one because the moment you trust them, they pack your bags." She looked up at him. "So do not ask me to trust you. Adrian, I don't know how." Adrian leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the sharp angles of his face, the hollows of his cheeks, the intense darkness of his eyes. "I do not trust anyone either," he confessed. The admission hung in the air. "In my world, trust gets you buried. My own uncle sold me out to the federals 10 years ago for a reduced sentence. I had to make a choice, go to prison or take over the family. I took over and I did things, necessary things, to ensure no one could ever sell me out again." He looked down at his hands. He opened them, flexing the long fingers. In the flash of another lightning strike, the bruised knuckles looked black. "These hands have done unforgivable things," he said. "They have stolen. They have broken bones. They have ended lives to protect what is mine." Raina stared at his hands. They should have terrified her. But looking at them now, all she could remember was the warmth of them over her own hand on the kettle, the steadiness of them on her wrists. Adrian looked up, locking eyes with her. "I don't trust people, Raina," he said, his voice rough with honesty. "But I trust what these hands can do." He reached out, not touching her, but letting his hand hover in the space between them. "And tonight," he added, his voice dropping to a whisper that seemed to wrap around her heart, "they only exist to make sure nothing touches you." The sincerity in his tone stripped away her defenses. Raina opened her mouth to speak, to say something, anything, to break the tension that was pulling them together like magnets. Crack! A gunshot. It was distant, muffled by the height and the storm, likely miles away in the city below. But to Raina's frayed nerves, it sounded like it was in the room. She gasped, jerking violently, her body curling inward. In a heartbeat, Adrian crossed the distance between them. He didn't grab her wrists this time. He sank to his knees in front of the sofa, bringing him to her eye level. He reached up and cupped her face with both hands. "Raina," he said firmly, "look at me." His thumbs brushed gently along her jawline, the skin rough but the touch incredibly tender. Her first instinct, honed by years of survival, was to pull back, to snap at him, to run, but she didn't. She held still. She let herself feel the steady warmth of his palms against her cheeks. She felt the calluses, the strength, the absolute control he was exerting to be gentle with her. He was an anchor in the middle of her panic. "I am here," he said. "You are safe. No one is getting in here." Raina stared into his eyes. They were dark and bottomless, and for the first time, she didn't see a threat. She saw a shield. Her breathing hitched. The air between them changed, shifting from fear to something heavier, something charged with a sudden, electric awareness. The distance between them had vanished. Adrian's gaze dropped to her mouth, then back up to her eyes. He was asking. He was giving her time to push him away. He was giving her the power. She didn't push. "Adrian?" she breathed. He leaned in slowly. When his lips touched hers, it wasn't the violent collision she might have expected from a man like him. It was cautious. It was a question. Raina's eyes fluttered shut. A soft sound escaped her throat, and she leaned into him. Adrian groaned low in his chest, the sound vibrating against her lips. His hands slid from her face, one moving to cradle the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair, the other slipping to the small of her back. He pulled her forward, pressing her body against his chest. The kiss deepened. It wasn't just physical. It was desperate. It felt like he was trying to breathe for her. It felt protective and overwhelming all at once. For a moment. Raina forgot the bar, the gunman, the foster homes. All that existed was the taste of him, whiskey and storm, and the feeling of being held by someone who would burn the world down before he let her fall. His hand on her back was firm, holding her together, while his thumb stroked the pulse point at her neck. It was possessive, but it was the kind of possession that felt like safety. Raina pulled back, gasping for air. They stared at each other in the dim light, their faces inches apart. Her heart was hammering against his chest. "I can't," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I can't promise you trust. Adrian, I don't know how to give that yet." Adrian rested his forehead against hers, his breathing ragged. "I'm not asking for promises. Raina, I am just asking you to stay. I can't ignore this," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "What I feel right now. I can't ignore it." "Then don't," he said. "Just feel it." He stayed there for another moment, holding her, before he slowly pulled away. He stood up, putting distance between them again, though the air still crackled with the energy of what had just happened. "There are 2 bedrooms," he said, his voice regaining some of its usual composure, though it sounded strained. "Down the hall. The one on the left has a lock on the inside. You take that one." Raina nodded, standing up on shaky legs. "Thank you. Get some sleep," Adrian said. He didn't look at her. He walked to the window, staring out at the storm, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Raina walked down the hall and went into the bedroom on the left. She closed the door and turned the lock. Click. She lay down on the bed, fully clothed, pulling the duvet up to her chin. She stared at the wall. On the other side of that wall, in the other room, she knew Adrian was awake. She could feel his presence as if he were lying right next to her. She raised her hand, touching her lips where his had been. Her skin still tingled from the roughness of his hands. She had told him she didn't trust anyone. But as she lay there in the dark, listening to the rain lash against the glass, Raina knew they had crossed a line tonight, a line that neither of them could step back from. And for the first time in years, she wasn't sure she wanted to. The phone call that shattered the fragile peace of the high-rise apartment came at dawn. The sky outside the floor-to-ceiling windows was the color of a bruised plum, the storm from the previous night having left behind a heavy, suffocating humidity. Adrian Moretti stood with his back to the room, the receiver pressed to his ear, his reflection in the glass looking like a ghost haunting his own life. "Say it again," Adrian commanded, his voice devoid of inflection. "The rusty anchor is gone. Boss." The voice on the other end crackled. It was his second in command, a man who did not rattle easily. But he sounded rattled now. "Fire started in the basement around 3 in the morning. Accelerants were used. The place burned hot and fast. By the time the fire trucks got past the conveniently stalled construction on the main avenue, there was nothing left but a shell. Adrian's grip on the phone tightened until the plastic creaked. And the staff? Only one casualty reported so far, the lieutenant said. The night manager, Stan. Nobody has seen him since closing. The word on the street is that he didn't make it out, or maybe he was taken out before the match was lit. Adrian ended the call without saying goodbye. He stared at the city below. The rusty anchor was not just a bar, it was where he had met Raina. Burning it was a message. Taking the manager was an interrogation. His enemies knew. They knew Raina existed. They knew she had seen something, or at least they believed she had. And most dangerous of all, they knew she was with him. The only way they could have moved this fast, with this much precision, was if someone inside his own organization had leaked her location. He turned around. Raina was standing in the hallway entrance, wrapped in a thick robe she must have found in the guest closet. Her hair was messy from sleep, her eyes wide and wary. She looked small against the stark, modern architecture of the safe house, but her chin was tilted up in that defiant way he was starting to recognize. "Something is wrong," she said. It wasn't a question. Adrian walked over to the kitchen island, placing his hands flat on the cold stone. They burned the bar. Raina. The color drained from her face. She reached out, gripping the doorframe. "Stan?" "Missing," Adrian said, deciding that the truth, however brutal, was the only thing he could offer her. "Likely taken. They are looking for you." Raina squeezed her eyes shut, a tremor passing through her. "Because of me. They hurt people because of me." "No," Adrian said sharply. He moved around the island, approaching her but stopping 3 feet away. "They did this because of me, because they want to hurt me, and they think you are the way to do it. You are not the cause, Raina. You are the leverage." She opened her eyes, and the fear in them had hardened into something brittle. "I need to leave. If I am not here, they won't have a reason to come after you." "If you leave," Adrian said, his voice dropping to a low, intense register, "you will be dead within the hour. Or worse, they will use you to get to me, and when they are done, they will discard you." He pulled a phone from his pocket and tapped a quick message. "I am doubling the guard. 2 men at the elevator, 2 in the stairwell. You do not leave this apartment, not for groceries, not for fresh air. You stay behind this glass until I say otherwise." Raina recoiled as if he had slapped her. The defiance in her posture turned into a defensive crouch. "So I am a prisoner." "You are protected," Adrian corrected. "It is the same thing," she shouted, the sound echoing off the hard surfaces. "I spent my childhood in rooms I couldn't leave. I spent 2 years with a man who told me who I could talk to and where I could go. I won't do it again. I won't be kept in a cage, Adrian, even if it is a gilded one." "It is not a cage," Adrian growled, his own temper flaring. The stress of the morning, the threat to her life, the betrayal within his ranks, it was all pressing against his composure. "It is a fortress, and you will stay in it because I will not let them touch you." "You don't get to decide that for me," Raina countered, stepping into his space, her finger jabbing the air between them. "I am not your property. I am a person, and if I am going to be stuck here while people are burning down my life, I need more than orders. I need a choice." Adrian stared at her. She was terrified, shaking and completely out of her depth, yet she was standing toe-to-toe with a mafia boss, demanding agency. The tension in his shoulders broke. He let out a long breath, running a hand through his hair. She was right. He was treating her like an asset to be secured, not a woman who had already survived hell. "Okay," he said quietly. Raina blinked, surprised by his sudden pivot. "Okay, tell me what you need," Adrian said. "What do you need to feel like you are not a prisoner?" Raina lowered her hand. She hugged the robe tighter around herself, thinking, "I need to work. I can't just sit here and watch the news and wait for you to come home with blood on your hands. The owner of the bar, he has other places. I handle the inventory orders and the social media for the whole group. I can do it from a laptop." "Done," Adrian said immediately. "I will have a secure laptop brought up, encrypted connection." "You can work as much as you want. And, Raina continued, her voice gaining strength, I want the truth. No more vague warnings about bad men. If I am a target, I want to know why. I want to know who is hunting me and who is protecting me. I want you to answer my questions. Adrian hesitated. His world was built on silence. Sharing secrets was a weakness. But looking at Raina, he realized that keeping her in the dark was what truly endangered her. Ask, he said. Who betrayed you? She asked. I don't know yet, Adrian admitted, but I will find them. And when you do, I will handle it. Does handle it mean murder? She asked bluntly. Adrian held her gaze. It means I will ensure they never threaten you again. Yes. Raina swallowed hard, but she didn't look away. Okay, those are my terms. I stay, I work, you talk. Agreed, Adrian said. The days that followed fell into a strange, suspended rhythm. The apartment became a capsule, separate from the rest of the world. Raina sat at the kitchen island for hours, typing furiously on the secure laptop Adrian had provided, organizing supply chains for bars that hadn't burned down. It gave her a sense of control, a tether to her old life. Adrian spent his time in the study or pacing the living room, whispering into his phone, moving pieces on a chessboard she couldn't see. But in the evenings, the dynamic shifted. They ate dinner together, takeout from the city's best restaurants, eaten straight from the cartons because neither of them had the energy to plate it. True to his word, Adrian answered her questions. He explained the factions in the city, the history of his family, the reason he was called the gentleman. He told her about the code he lived by, a twisted sort of honor that made sense only when viewed from the inside. In return, Raina told him about the foster homes, the ones that smelled like cabbage, the ones where she had to lock her door with a chair, and the one decent mother who had died too soon. The power imbalance remained. He was the captor-protector. She was the guest victim, but the mutual concessions built a bridge. She saw the man beneath the suit. He saw the steel beneath her fear. On the fourth night, the storm returned. It started with a low rumble of thunder that shook the glass walls. By midnight, the rain was lashing against the building like gravel. Raina was asleep in the guest room. Or she had been. The dream was always the same. She was back in the alley. But this time, the pavement was made of quicksand. The masked man was grabbing her, pulling her down. She tried to scream, but her mouth was full of ash. She reached out for help, but Adrian was standing at the end of the alley, his hands tied behind his back, watching her sink. No! Raina woke with a gasp. Sitting bolt upright in bed, her skin was clammy with sweat, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The room was dark, lit only by the flashes of lightning outside. She buried her face in her hands, trying to regulate her breathing. In for 4, out for 4. But the panic was a living thing, clawing at her throat. Raina? The voice came from the doorway. She looked up. Adrian was standing there. He was wearing lounge pants and a dark t-shirt, his feet bare on the hardwood floor. He looked softer without the armor of his suits, but his presence still filled the frame. He did not rush in. He stood at the threshold, one hand resting on the door jamb. He saw her distress, the heaving chest, the wild eyes, but he didn't cross the line. "May I come in?" he asked. The question hung in the air, a stark contrast to every man who had ever barged into her space without asking. Raina nodded, her voice failing her. Adrian walked into the room. He moved slowly, broadcasting his intent. He came to the side of the bed and sat down on the edge of the mattress, leaving a respectful distance between them. "Nightmare?" he asked softly. "The same one," she whispered. She looked at her hands, which were shaking again. "It won't stop." Adrian reached out. "Give me your hand." She hesitated for a split second, then placed her hand in his. He took it in both of his own. His palms were warm, dry, and rough with calluses. He began to stroke the center of her palm with his thumb, a slow, rhythmic circle. "Focus on the pressure," he said, his voice a deep murmur that cut through the thunder. "Right here, nowhere else. Just my thumb, just this moment." Raina watched his hand. It was large enough to crush hers, yet he held her with the delicacy of someone handling a wounded bird. "You have good hands," she said, the words slipping out before she could filter them. Adrian paused, his thumb stilling for a moment before resuming its rhythm. "Most people would disagree. Most people see weapons. I know what weapons feel like," Raina said, her voice trembling. "I know what danger feels like. Being touched. It usually sets off alarms in my head. My body braces for the hit, or the grab." She looked up at his face, shadowed in the dim light. "But your hands, they make me forget. When you touch me, I don't think about survival. I think about—" She trailed off, flushing. "About what?" Adrian asked, his voice rough. "Safety," she whispered. Adrian let out a breath that sounded like a shudder. He shifted closer, turning his body fully toward her. He didn't let go of her hand. "Raina," he said. And the way he said her name made her heart skip a beat, not from fear but from anticipation. "For 20 years, I have used these hands to break things, to dismantle problems, to build walls." He lifted her hand, bringing it to his lips. He pressed a kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "For the first time," he confessed, "I want my touch to heal more than it harms. I want to be the one place where you don't have to fight." The air in the room grew heavy, charged with the electric tension of two people who had been circling each other for days. The shared sleeplessness, the proximity, the danger outside, it all compressed into this single square foot of space between them. Raina leaned forward. She couldn't help it. She was drawn to him like a moth to the only light in a blackout. "Then don't fight me," she whispered. Adrian didn't wait. He leaned in and captured her lips. This kiss was different from the one in the living room. That one had been a question. This one was an answer. It was deep, hungry, and laced with a desperation that shook them both. Raina made a small sound in her throat, her fingers curling into the fabric of his t-shirt, pulling him closer. Adrian groaned, his control fraying. He shifted, moving to sit fully on the bed, one leg hooking over the edge. He didn't push her down. He guided her. His hand moved to the back of her head, protecting it as he slowly lowered her against the pillows. He hovered over her, his weight supported on his forearms, careful not to pin her. He was a canopy of warmth and darkness. His hand slid down her arm, tracing the line of her side, resting on the curve of her waist. He squeezed gently, testing, waiting. "Here," he murmured against her mouth. "Is this okay?" Raina felt a flicker of the old panic, the feeling of being trapped beneath a larger body. Her breath hitched. Adrian froze instantly. He pulled back an inch, his eyes searching hers. "Raina." She looked at him. She saw the concern etched into his features, the absolute willingness to stop the moment she said the word. That willingness was the key. It unlocked the cage. "Yes," she whispered. And this time, it wasn't a surrender to fate. It was a choice. "Yes, Adrian. It is okay." He lowered his head, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He kissed the sensitive skin there, his stubble grazing her, sending shivers down her spine. "Tell me if it changes," he mumbled against her skin. "Tell me." "I will," she promised. She reached up, tangling her fingers in his dark hair, pulling him down to her. The darkness of the room swallowed the details, leaving only the sound of ragged breathing and the rustle of sheets. It was a slow, deliberate exploration. Every touch from him was a question. Every response from her a validation. He mapped her body with a reverence that bordered on worship, as if he were memorizing a sacred text, and Raina, who had learned to dissociate from her own skin to survive, found herself slamming back into her body with a force that was terrifying and exhilarating. She learned that night that being held didn't have to mean being restrained. She learned that strength could be used to shelter rather than subjugate, and Adrian, the man who trusted no one, found that the most dangerous thing he had ever done was to place his heart in the hands of the woman beneath him. Hours later, the storm had passed. The room was silent, save for the hum of the city waking up far below. Raina lay with her head resting on Adrian's chest, his arm wrapped firmly around her shoulders, holding her close. The sheet was tangled around their legs. She listened to the steady thump of his heart. It was a slow, powerful rhythm. She traced a scar on his chest with her fingertip. "I still don't trust anyone," she murmured, the words vibrating against his skin. "The world is still full of monsters." Adrian tightened his arm around her, kissing the top of her head. "It is. But," she added, her voice soft and sleepy, "I'm starting to believe in what your hands can do when they aren't obeying the orders of your world." Adrian lay still, staring at the ceiling. The peace in the room was palpable, a fragile bubble of existence that felt almost holy, but his mind was already racing. He heard the phantom ring of the phone, the news of the burning bar. He thought of the mole in his organization, the rival crews circling like sharks, the inevitability of the violence that was coming for them. Raina believed in his hands. She believed they could protect her. But as he held her there, in the quiet aftermath of their intimacy, Adrian felt a cold knot of dread tighten in his stomach. He knew, with a fatalistic certainty, that his world was closing in fast, and to keep this woman safe, his hands were going to have to do things that would make her question everything she had just started to believe. "Rest, Raina," he whispered into the darkness. "Just rest." The morning sun did not break gently over the city of Northbridge. It pierced the heavy smog like a welding torch, casting harsh, unforgiving shadows across the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse. The storm had passed, leaving the air outside thick and humid, but inside the climate-control department, the atmosphere was brittle, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. Adrian Moretti stood by the glass wall, a cup of black coffee cooling in his hand. He had not slept, while Raina rested in the guest room, secure in the temporary sanctuary of his protection. Adrian had been awake, watching the city that wanted to devour them both. His phone vibrated against the marble countertop. It was a single, short buzz. Adrian set his coffee down and picked up the device. It was a message from an unknown number. There was no text, only a series of attachments. He opened the first file. It was a grainy, high-contrast photograph taken from a long-range lens. It showed the service entrance of the building. In the center of the frame, clear enough to be undeniable, was Adrian's profile. And tucked under his arm, her face partially obscured by his jacket, but unmistakable to anyone who was looking for her, was Raina. The timestamp was 3:14 in the morning. Adrian swiped to the next photo. It was a zoomed-in shot of Raina's face through the car window as they arrived. She looked terrified, pale, and beautiful. The final message was text. "She is very pretty. Does she know what you really are? The North Side routes, or the girl? You have until noon to decide what you want to keep." Adrian's hand tightened around the phone, the metal casing groaning under the pressure. They knew. They had been watching the building before he even arrived. The breach was not just a leak, it was a sieve. His enemies were not guessing anymore. They were dictating terms. He needed time. He needed to move Raina, but he could not move her blindly. If they had eyes on the building, any attempt to leave would be an invitation for an ambush on the open road. He had to make them think he was considering the deal. He had to make them think he was the cold, calculating businessman they expected him to be. He dialed the number back. It rang twice before a voice answered. It was Marco Vescari, the rival underboss who had been circling Adrian's territory like a starving wolf for months. "The gentleman calls." Marco's voice was smooth, oily with satisfaction. "I assume you liked my photography?" "Your composition lacks subtlety," Adrian replied, his voice flat and steady. He turned his back to the hallway, staring out at the skyline. "Let us skip the pleasantries. Marco, you want the laundering routes through the docks." "I want everything, Adrian, but I will settle for the docks, for now." "And the girl?" Adrian asked. He forced his voice to sound indifferent, detached. "She is a civilian. She knows nothing. She's just a complication I picked up on a bad night." "A complication you took to your private safe house?" Marco laughed. "You are getting sentimental. I am getting practical." Adrian lied, injecting a note of irritation into his tone. "She is a witness. I kept her close to ensure she stayed quiet. But if she is the price of doing business, then we can discuss a trade." In the hallway, the door to the guest bedroom had opened silently. Raina stood frozen in the threshold. She was still wearing the oversized robe, her hair tousled from sleep, a softness about her that vanished the instant the words hit her ears. "She is just a complication. We can discuss a trade." The blood drained from her face, the warmth of the previous night, the safety she had felt in his arms, the belief that his hands were a shield. It all evaporated, replaced by the icy, familiar dread of betrayal. She had heard this tone before. She had heard men discuss her fate as if she were a piece of furniture, an inconvenience to be managed. She had let her guard down. She had trusted him. And now, in the harsh light of day, he was selling her to save his empire. "Fine," Adrian said into the phone, unaware of the audience behind him. "I will draw up the transfer, but I need assurance that the girl walks away. She's useless to you once I hand over the territory. Call me when the paperwork is ready," Marco said, and the line went dead. Adrian lowered the phone, exhaling a long, sharp breath. He was buying time. He just needed enough time to mobilize an extraction team that Marco wasn't watching. He turned around. Raina was standing 10 feet away. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides, her knuckles white. Her eyes were not filled with tears. They were burning with a dry, devastating fury. "Raina," Adrian said, stepping forward. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough," she said. Her voice was steady, but it was the steadiness of a wire pulled until it snaps. "I'm a complication? Is that it? A loose end you need to trade?" "No," Adrian said quickly, crossing the room. "You misunderstood. I was buying time. I have to make them believe I am willing to negotiate. You told him I was useless," Raina spat, stepping back as he approached. "You told him you would discuss a trade. I heard you. Adrian, you are bargaining with my life. I am playing a game with men who do not have rules," Adrian shouted. His calm cracking, he stopped, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "If I tell them you matter to me, if I show them any weakness, they will never let you go. They will use you to bleed me dry and then kill you just to watch me break. I have to pretend you are nothing so that I can get you out." "And how do I know that is the lie?" Raina challenged, her voice rising. "How do I know that last night wasn't the lie? You said you don't trust anyone. You said you did unforgivable things for your family. Maybe sacrificing one bartender is just another unforgivable thing you are willing to do to keep your power. I would burn this city to the ground before I let them touch you," Adrian growled, his eyes dark with intensity. "Words," Raina said, shaking her head. "Just words. You are a criminal. Adrian, you live by lying. You hurt people for a living. And I was stupid enough to think that just because you held me, you were different." She turned and walked rapidly toward the bedroom. "Raina, wait," Adrian called after her. "Leave me alone," she screamed back. "Don't come near me." She slammed the bedroom door. The lock clicked. Adrian stood in the living room, his chest heaving. He wanted to kick the door down. He wanted to shake her until she understood that he was the only thing standing between her and a grave. But he knew that force would only confirm her worst fears. She was reacting to trauma with trauma. She was cornered, and she was lashing out. He needed to give her a moment. He needed to secure the perimeter before he could explain the plan. Inside the bedroom, Raina leaned against the door, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She felt sick. She felt foolish. The memory of his hands on her skin, the tenderness in his eyes, it all felt like a manipulation now. He was a predator. He had charmed her, disarmed her, and now he was going to discard her. She pushed herself off the door. She wouldn't wait for the trade. She wouldn't be a pawn. She went to the desk where the secure laptop sat. She opened it, her fingers flying across the keys. She didn't search for flights. Adrian would have those flagged. She searched for a name she remembered from the bar, a man who tipped poorly but always left his business card on the counter, bragging about the exposés he was writing on the city's corruption. David Hale, Northbridge Gazette. She found the number for the news desk. She grabbed the landline on the bedside table. Her hand shook, but she forced herself to dial. "News desk, Hale speaking." A tired voice answered. "This is Raina Cole," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You used to come into the Rusty Anchor. I served you bourbon." "I remember." The voice perked up. "Place burned down last night. Tragedy. You okay?" "I have information," Raina said, rushing the words. "About the fire, about the North Side crime families, about Adrian Moretti." There was a pause on the line, the sound of a chair squeaking. "You have my attention. Miss Cole." "I need a way out," she said. I am stuck. I need a ride out of the city, somewhere safe. If you get me out, I will give you everything I know. I will tell you who burned the bar. I will tell you where Moretti is hiding." "Where are you?" Hale asked. "I can have a car there in 20 minutes. I am at—" The door to the bedroom exploded inward. Raina screamed, dropping the phone. It clattered against the hardwood floor. Adrian stood in the doorway. It looked terrifying. The gentleman was gone. This was the boss. This was the monster everyone whispered about. His face was a mask of cold, lethal rage. He had been monitoring the outgoing calls. He walked into the room, kicking the phone cord out of the wall with a violent jerk. "You called the press," he roared, his voice shaking the walls. "Are you trying to commit suicide?" Raina backed away until her legs hit the edge of the bed. "I am trying to survive you. You have no idea what you just did." Adrian advanced on her, backing her away from the bed, backing her toward the wall. "You think a journalist can protect you? Marco has people in the police, in the press, in the courts. That phone call just lit a flare over this building." "I don't care," Raina yelled back, fear making her reckless. "I would rather take my chances with them than wait for you to sell me. I was never going to sell you." "You are a liar," Raina cried, tears finally spilling over. "You are a liar and a criminal, and I hate that I trusted you." Adrian moved so fast she didn't see him coming. He slammed his hands against the wall on either side of her head, trapping her. The sound was like a gunshot. Raina flinched, squeezing her eyes shut, bracing for the blow. She pulled her shoulders up, making herself small, waiting for the pain. It didn't come. She heard Adrian's breathing, heavy, ragged, close to her ear. She felt the heat of his body, an inch away, but he was not touching her. He was bracing himself against the wall, his arms rigid, his muscles trembling with the effort of restraint. Slowly, Raina opened her eyes. Adrian was staring at her. His eyes were wild, filled with a mixture of fury and terrified desperation. He looked like a man watching his world crumble. "I have bled," he whispered, his voice cracking, "to keep you alive for 48 hours. I have started a war I cannot win. I have burned bridges I spent 10 years building. And you think I would hand you over?" Raina looked at him. She looked at his hands, pressed flat against the wall. The knuckles were still bruised, the veins stood out under the skin. "I trusted your hands last night," she said through clenched teeth, her voice trembling but clear. "Just once. I let you hold me. I let you make me feel safe." She met his gaze, refusing to look away. "If you do not let me go now," she whispered, "if you keep me here against my will, then you prove I was wrong. You prove that those hands are just cages, and everything we said last night was a lie." The words hit Adrian with the force of a physical blow. He flinched, the anger in his eyes fractured, revealing the raw, bleeding wound beneath. He looked at his hands, the hands he had promised would only protect her. Now, they were barring her exit. They were the bars of the cell. He had become the thing she feared. Adrian let out a choked sound. He pushed himself off the wall, stumbling back a step. He dropped his hands to his sides, palms open, showing her he held no weapon, no restraint. "I am not a cage," he said, his voice hollow. He stepped aside, clearing the path to the door. "Go," he said. Raina blinked, stunned. "What?" "Go," Adrian repeated, staring at the floor. "If you think you are safer out there, go. Take the service elevator. Walk out the front door. I won't stop you." Raina stared at him for a heartbeat. She saw the defeat in his posture. She saw the way his hands were shaking. Part of her wanted to reach out, to ask him to explain, to fix it, but the fear was too loud. The phone call was too fresh. She grabbed her purse from the chair. She didn't look back. She ran out of the room, down the hall, and out of the apartment. Adrian listened to her footsteps fade. He didn't move. He waited until he heard the elevator chime. Then he pulled his phone from his pocket. "Leo," he said, his voice dead. "She is leaving the building. She is on foot. Follow her. Stay out of sight. Do not let her see you. But if anyone gets within 10 feet of her, you put them down. Do you understand?" "On it, boss," Leo replied. Adrian walked to the window. He watched the street below. Minutes passed. They felt like hours. He saw a small figure emerge from the building's entrance. Raina. She was walking fast, clutching her jacket around her, heading toward the main avenue where the taxis gathered. He saw Leo exit a moment later, trailing her from across the street, blending into the crowd. "She is safe," Adrian whispered to himself. "She is free." Then, a black van screeched around the corner. It mounted the curb, cutting Raina off. Adrian's blood turned to ice. "Leo, move!" he screamed into the phone. He watched, helpless behind the glass, as the side door of the van slid open. 2 men jumped out. Raina tried to run, but they were too fast. One grabbed her waist, the other threw a bag over her head. Leo sprinted across the street, gun drawn. He got off 2 shots. Adrian saw the puffs of smoke before a third man in the van fired a shotgun from the window. Leo went down, clutching his leg. The men shoved Raina into the van. The door slammed shut. The vehicle peeled away, disappearing into the chaotic traffic of the city. It had taken less than 15 seconds. "No," Adrian breathed, his hand pressing against the glass. "No, no, no." The phone in his hand buzzed again. It was a multimedia message. Adrian didn't want to look. He had to look. He opened the video. The camera was shaky. It showed a dim, concrete room. In the center, tied to a wooden chair with thick yellow rope, was Raina. The bag was gone. Her lip was split. She was breathing hard, her eyes darting around the room in terror. A hand, Marco's hand, wearing a heavy gold ring, came into the frame. It grabbed Raina's chin, forcing her to look at the camera. "You should have taken the trade, Adrian," Marco's voice sneered from behind the camera. "Now the price has gone up, and the merchandise is damaged." The video cut to black. Adrian lowered the phone. A silence settled over the apartment, heavier and darker than any storm, the illusion of choice. He had tried to give her the illusion of choice, to manage her like a variable in an equation, and because he hadn't trusted her with the truth, she had run straight into the mouth of the wolf. This was his fault. A cold, deadly calm descended over him. The gentleman died in that moment. The negotiator died. The man who tried to balance the books died. He walked to the wall safe hidden behind a painting. He punched in the code and pulled out a heavy, matte black handgun and 2 extra magazines. He dialed his lieutenant. "Boss," the voice answered. "We heard the scanner. Shots fired on 5th. "Call everyone," Adrian said. His voice was not loud. It was the quiet before the earthquake. "Every soldier, every associate, every favor we are owed. Wake them up." "What are the orders?" "We're not trading," Adrian said, checking the chamber of his gun. "We're not negotiating. We're going to find Marco Vescari, and we are going to burn his entire world down until there is nothing left but ash." "And the girl?" "If she has a single new scratch on her," Adrian said, "I will kill everyone in this city." He holstered the weapon. He looked at his hands one last time. "I told you," he whispered to the empty room. "I told you these hands would keep you alive." He turned and walked out the door. He didn't lock it. There was nothing left in the apartment worth protecting. The phone on the mahogany desk rang at exactly 9 in the evening. It was a single, black landline that Adrian kept specifically for calls he hoped never to receive. The sound was shrill, cutting through the heavy silence of the office where Adrian Moretti sat like a statue carved from ice. He picked it up on the second ring. He did not speak. "Adrian," Marco Vescari's voice oozed through the receiver, rich with the arrogance of a man holding a winning hand. "I assume you have had enough time to mourn your mistake? State your terms." "Marco," Adrian said. His voice was devoid of emotion, a flat line that betrayed nothing of the firestorm raging in his chest. The terms are simple, Marco replied. I want the Northbridge distribution routes. I want the laundering fronts at the docks, and I want the union contracts for the sanitation department. You sign over full control by midnight, and I will tell you where to find the girl. Adrian's grip on the receiver tightened until the plastic groaned. Marco was asking for the spine of his empire. He was asking Adrian to gut his own organization, to surrender the legacy his father and grandfather had built, leaving him with nothing but scraps. And if I refuse? Adrian asked softly. Marco laughed, a low, wet sound. Then I will start sending her back to you, one piece at a time. She's quite resilient, your little bartender. But everyone breaks eventually. Adrian, even the ones you think are innocent, especially them. If you touch her, Adrian said, his voice dropping to a register that was barely human. If you lay a single finger on her, Marco. Empty threats from a man in an empty castle. Marco interrupted. She does not belong in our world. Adrian, you know this. You brought a lamb into a slaughterhouse because you were lonely, because you are soft. Now you have to pay the butcher's bill. Midnight, do not be late. The line clicked dead. Adrian slowly lowered the receiver. He stared at the wall, his vision tunneling. The insult didn't matter. The territory didn't matter. The only thing echoing in his mind was Marco's promise of pain. Boss. A gravelly voice broke his concentration. Silvio, his consigliere and the oldest member of the family, stepped out of the shadows of the room. Silvio had served Adrian's father. He was a pragmatist, a man who viewed human life as a column on a ledger. You cannot do this, Silvio said, walking to the desk. The docks, the union contracts, that is 80% of our revenue. If you sign that over, we are finished. The other families will smell blood. They will pick us apart within a week. I know, Adrian said. She is one woman. Silvio pressed, his voice urgent. I know you have affection for her, but women come and go. Adrian, an empire like this, once it falls, it does not rebuild itself. You cannot burn down a kingdom to save a stranger. Adrian turned his head slowly to look at Silvio. The expression on his face made the older man take an involuntary step back. It was not anger. It was a cold, absolute resolve that looked terrifyingly like death. She's not a stranger, Adrian said, and she is not just a woman. She is the one person I promised to protect. If I cannot keep that promise, then this empire is already worthless. Adrian, be reasonable. I am done being reasonable. Adrian cut him off. He stood up, buttoning his jacket with steady hands. I'm not signing anything, and I am not waiting until midnight. He walked to the large monitor on the wall. Play the video again. Silvio hesitated, then sighed and tapped the keyboard. The footage of Reina tied to the chair filled the screen. Adrian watched it for the 100th time. He ignored the fear in her eyes, forcing himself to bypass the emotional gut punch so he could function as the weapon she needed. He focused on the background. Freeze it, Adrian commanded. The image paused. Look there. Adrian pointed to the top left corner of the frame. Through a grime-streaked window high on the wall, there was a faint, rhythmic pulsing of red light. Neon, it flickers every 3 seconds. Could be anything, Silvio said. A bar. A motel. And listen, Adrian said. Isolate the audio track at the 10-second mark. Raise the background gain. Silvio adjusted the levels. Through the speakers came the muffled, distorted sound of Reina's breathing, Marco's taunts, and then, very faintly in the distance, a long, mournful blast. A train horn, Adrian said. 2 blasts, short, then 1 long. That is the signal for the crossing at the industrial park on the west side. The tracks run right behind the old textile district. He looked back at the red light. There is only one place in that district with a neon sign that high up. The old Starlight Motel sign. It has been broken for years, flickering on and off. He turned to Silvio. She is in the warehouse directly opposite the Starlight, the old weaving factory. Silvio stared at him, then nodded slowly, a grudging respect entering his eyes. I will call the crew. No, Adrian said. Not the whole crew, just the inner circle. Just the men who are ready to die tonight. because we are not going there to negotiate. We are going there to end it. 5 miles away. The air in the warehouse smelled of wet rot and rusted iron. Raina sat in the wooden chair, her wrists screaming in protest against the thick yellow ropes. Her lip was throbbing where one of Marco's men had backhanded her hours ago, but the physical pain was distant, muffled by the sheer force of her will to survive. She was not crying. She was counting. In for 4. Out for 4. Adrian's voice echoed in her head, steady and grounding. Do not fight the panic. Use it. Feel the floor under your boots. She dug her heels into the concrete. She felt the texture of the rope against her skin. She had been twisting her wrists back and forth for hours, ignoring the friction burns, working the fibers loose millimeter by millimeter. It wasn't enough to slip free yet, but it was enough to keep the blood flowing. She watched her captors. There were 4 of them in the room, playing cards on a crate, their weapons resting on the table. They were loud, confident, laughing about what they would spend their cut on when Marco closed the deal. They didn't look at her. To them, she was just luggage. But Raina was learning. She was watching their rotation. Every 30 minutes. One of them walked the perimeter. Every hour. They switched positions. She cursed herself for leaving the apartment. She cursed herself for not trusting Adrian when he said he had a plan. Her foolish pride, her trauma response need for control, had led her straight into hell. But she refused to die here. She refused to let this be the end of the story. One of the guards, a man with greasy hair and a jagged scar on his chin, stood up and walked over to her. He didn't have a weapon in his hand. He had a bottle of water. "Thirsty, sweetheart?" he asked, grinning. Raina didn't answer. She stared straight ahead. "Boss says we gotta keep you alive," the guard said, crouching down so his face was level with hers. "Didn't say we couldn't have a little fun while we wait." He reached out. His hand, smelling of tobacco and dirt, moved toward her knee. Raina didn't think. She reacted. She jerked her leg up, slamming her boot into his chest. It wasn't a strong kick. She was tied down. But the surprise of it made him stumble back. "Don't touch me," she snarled. The fear was there. Yes, but beneath it was a white-hot rage that felt like fire in her veins. The guard laughed, recovering his balance. He stepped closer, his eyes darkening. "Feisty. I like that." He reached for her again, his hand going for her face this time, his fingers brushing her cheek with a possessive arrogance that made her skin crawl. "Your body is yours," Adrian had told her. "Anyone who forgets, that answers to me." The memory of his voice was so clear it was almost physical. She remembered the weight of his hands on her back, the respectful distance he kept until she invited him in. She remembered the violence he was capable of, and for the first time in her life, she didn't fear it. She craved it. She wanted his hands here. She wanted his brutality. "He's going to kill you," Raina said. Her voice was low, shaking not with terror, but with certainty. The guard paused. "Who?" "The gentleman. He's signing papers right now. Girl, he sold you out." "No," Raina said, locking eyes with him. "He didn't. And when he gets here, you are going to wish you had run." The guard sneered and raised his hand to strike her again. Suddenly, the lights in the warehouse flickered. A heavy, metallic thud echoed from the main bay doors. Then silence. The guards at the table stopped playing cards. They grabbed their rifles. "Check it," one of them barked. The guard near Raina hesitated, then drew his pistol and moved toward the door. Raina's heart hammered against her ribs. She twisted her wrists violently, ignoring the tearing skin. "He is here." Outside the heavy steel doors of the weaving factory, the night was suffocatingly dark. The wind coming off the train tracks carried the scent of ozone and rain. Adrian stood in the shadows, flanked by 6 of his best men. They were dressed in tactical gear, silent as ghosts. Adrian looked down at his hands. He opened them, staring at the palms. These hands had pulled triggers. They had broken bones. They had signed death warrants for years. He had told himself that he did what he did for the family, for the empire, for survival. He had accepted that his hands were instruments of destruction, but tonight felt different. Tonight, he wasn't fighting for territory. He wasn't fighting for money. And he was preparing to tear the world apart for a woman who drank tea with trembling fingers and worked up the courage to say yes to a kiss. He flexed his fingers. The knuckles were still bruised from the alley. "I trust what these hands can do," he had told her. Tonight, he had to prove it. He looked up. His eyes were void of humanity. He nodded once to the man beside him. The breach was not dramatic. There were no explosions. There was only the synchronized hiss of suppressors and the dull thud of bodies hitting the floor as they eliminated the outer sentries. Adrian moved first. He didn't wait for his men to clear the room. He had a singular, magnetic focus on the center of the building. They swept into the main floor. The warehouse was a labyrinth of old machinery and crates. "Contact left," a voice whispered in his earpiece. 2 shots. A body fell from the catwalk above. Adrian moved with a terrifying fluidity. He was not a brawler tonight. He was a wraith. He moved through the shadows, his gun an extension of his will. A guard rounded a stack of pallets, raising an automatic rifle. Adrian didn't break stride. He fired twice, double tap to the chest, and stepped over the man before he hit the ground. The violence was precise. It was efficient. It was bone-crunching. Adrian disarmed a second man who tried to rush him, twisting the guard's arm with a sickening crack and driving the butt of his pistol into the man's temple. He didn't stop to check if they were alive. He didn't care. He reached the heavy metal door of the foreman's office. He could hear voices inside. He could hear Marco's laugh, and then he heard a crash, the sound of wood splintering. Reyna. Adrian didn't check the door handle. He raised his leg and kicked the door just below the lock. The metal groaned and gave way, flying open with a deafening bang. The scene inside froze in a tableau of chaos. Reyna was there, but she wasn't waiting to be saved. She had tipped the chair over, using her body weight to smash the weakened wood against the concrete floor. One of the legs had snapped. Her left hand was free, the rope dangling from her wrist, raw and bleeding. She was scrambling backward, clutching a shard of the broken chair leg like a shiv, her eyes wild and feral. Marco Vescari stood over her, a look of shock on his face that was rapidly turning to rage. He raised his gun toward her. "Adrian!" Reyna screamed. Adrian didn't think, he didn't aim, he fired. The bullet took Marco in the shoulder, spinning him around. Marco's gun clattered to the floor. Adrian was across the room in 2 strides. He didn't go for Marco. He went for Reyna. He dropped to his knees beside her, holstering his weapon and pulling a knife from his belt in one fluid motion. Reyna flinched, raising the shard of wood, her eyes unseeing in the panic. "It is me," Adrian said, his voice rough, cutting through the haze. "Reyna, it is me." She froze. The shard of wood fell from her hand. Adrian sliced through the remaining ropes binding her right arm and her ankles. He threw the knife aside. "I told you," he choked out, his hands shaking for the first time that night as he reached for her. "I told you my hands would keep you alive." Reyna let out a sob that sounded like something breaking. She threw herself at him. It wasn't a gentle embrace. It was a collision. She buried her face in his neck, her hands clutching at his tactical vest, her fingers digging in as if she were trying to merge her body with his. Adrian wrapped his arms around her, pulling her off the floor and into his lap. He crushed her against him, burying his face in her hair. He was shaking. The adrenaline that had sustained him crashed into a wall of overwhelming, suffocating relief. "I have you," he murmured into her hair, rocking her slightly. "I have you, I have you." Around them, the room was secured. His men dragged the wounded Marco out, shouting orders, clearing the building. But in that corner, amidst the debris of the broken chair and the smell of gunpowder, there was only the 2 of them. Reyna clung to him, weeping openly now, the tears mixing with the sweat and grime on her face. She felt the solid wall of his chest. She felt the violent strength of his arms, which were currently holding her with a desperation that mirrored her own. She pulled back just enough to look at him. Her hands came up to cup his face, smearing a streak of dirt on his cheek. She looked at his eyes, dark, terrified, and filled with a love that terrified him more than any gun. "You came," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You came for me. I would have burned the world, Adrian said, his forehead pressing against hers. I would have given them everything, the city, the money, everything, just for this. He kissed her then. It wasn't sexual, it was elemental. It was a seal on a pact forged in blood and terror. It was an affirmation of life in a room full of death. Raina kissed him back with a fierce possessiveness, her body finally acknowledging what her mind had been fighting. She belonged here, not in his world, but in his arms. Let's go home, Adrian whispered against her lips. I don't have a home, Raina said, her voice trembling. Adrian pulled back, his hands framing her face, his thumbs brushing away the tears. Yes, you do. He lifted her into his arms, standing up. Raina wrapped her legs around his waist and buried her face in his neck again, hiding from the world. Adrian walked out of the warehouse, stepping over the wreckage of his enemies, carrying the only thing that mattered. He didn't look back at the empire he had risked destroying. He only looked at the woman in his arms, and he knew, with a clarity that cut deeper than any knife, that the war was far from over. In fact, now that he had something to lose, it had only just begun. The safe house was a cabin buried deep in the timberline, miles north of the city limits where the skyline of Northbridge dissolved into dense pine and silence. It was a place that did not exist on any map Adrian Moretti owned, a ghost property purchased with cash years ago for a day he hoped would never come. Inside, the air was still and smelled of cedar and dust. Outside, the world was burning. Adrian sat on the edge of the worn leather sofa, his elbows resting on his knees, listening to the police scanner he had set up on the coffee table. The chatter was a chaotic symphony of sirens and dispatch codes. Marco Vescari's retaliation had been swift and sloppy. 2 of Adrian's warehouses were in flames. A shootout had erupted on the highway. The police, sensing the sudden vacuum of power and the scent of blood in the water, were swarming the streets, kicking down doors they usually ignored. Raina stood by the fireplace, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. She was clean now. The grime of the warehouse washed away in the cabin's small shower, but the shadow of the rope burns on her wrists remained, angry red bracelets that marked her survival. She watched Adrian. He looked exhausted. The invincibility of the gentleman had worn thin, revealing a man carrying the weight of a collapsing sky. What is happening out there? Raina asked, her voice quiet in the large room. Adrian reached out and turned the volume down on the scanner until the static was just a whisper. He looked at her, his dark eyes heavy with a mixture of relief and regret. War, he said simply. Marco is lashing out, my lieutenants are striking back, and the law is finally waking up to the noise. Raina walked closer, the floorboards creaking softly under her bare feet. And you are here with me. I am where I need to be, Adrian said. But at what cost? Raina pressed. She sat down next to him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body, but not touching him yet. I heard what Marco said on the phone. Adrian, he wanted your territory. He wanted the docks. He wanted everything your family built. Adrian looked at his hands, turning them over to inspect the palms. They were clean of blood, but they felt heavier than they ever had. I gave him nothing, Adrian said. But to get you out, I had to pull every resource I had. I had to expose my best men. I had to burn safe houses and call in favors that act as currency in my world. By saving you tonight, I signaled to every enemy I have that I am no longer thinking about the business. I am thinking about a woman. He looked up at her, his expression stark. They know I am vulnerable now. The empire is fracturing. Raina, the alliances I spent 10 years building are turning to ash as we speak. Raina felt the air leave her lungs. She had feared being a pawn, a trade piece. Instead, she had been the queen for whom the king toppled his own board. You destroyed it, she whispered, the realization settling over her like a physical weight. You destroyed everything you worked for me. I would do it again, Adrian said, his voice dropping to a rough murmur. I would burn it all twice. Am I worth that much destruction? Raina asked, her voice trembling. I am just a bartender. Adrian, I am broken. I don't know if I can ever be whole again. And you sacrificed a kingdom for a girl who is afraid of her own shadow." Adrian shifted, turning his body toward her. "You are not broken, Reina. You are the only thing in my life that is real. The empire? The money? It is just noise. It was a cage I built for myself because I didn't think I deserved anything else. But when I saw you in that chair—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. "I realized I would rather live in the ashes with you than rule the world without you." The sincerity in his voice cracked the last wall of defense Reina had built around her heart. She looked at this dangerous, violent man who had torn his life apart to save hers, and she didn't see a monster. She saw a savior. She reached out, her hand shaking slightly, covered his where it rested on his knee. "I want to trust you," she said softly. "You don't have to," Adrian said. "Not yet. No." Reina shook her head. She stood up, taking his hand and pulling gently. "I want to... Come with me." She led him to the small bedroom at the back of the cabin. The storm had cleared outside, leaving a bright, cold moon that cast silver rectangles across the quilt. The room was simple, intimate, stripped of the luxury of the penthouse and the pretenses of their former lives. Reina turned to face him in the dim light. She placed her hands flat against his chest, feeling the steady, powerful thud of his heart beneath the black shirt. "I don't trust the boss," she whispered, stepping closer until there was no air left between them. "I don't trust the empire, but I trust the man. I trust the man whose hands held me when I was shaking. I trust the man who cut the ropes." She took his hands and guided them to her waist. "Show me," she said. "Show me that these hands can hold me without hurting me." Adrian let out a breath that sounded like a prayer. He lowered his forehead to rest against hers, his eyes closing. "Reina." He moved slowly, giving her 1,000 chances to back away. When she didn't, his hands slid around her, pulling her flush against him. It wasn't the desperate, frantic embrace of the warehouse. This was deliberate. It was a claiming, but it was also a surrender. He kissed her, and the world outside, the sirens, the fire, the war ceased to exist. Reina didn't flinch. She leaned into him, her body molding to the hard lines of his. She tangled her fingers in his hair, pulling him deeper, demanding more. For the first time, she wasn't just tolerating touch. She was seeking it. She felt the calluses on his palms as they mapped the curve of her spine, tracing the line of her hip with a tenderness that was almost painful in its intensity. They moved together in the half-darkness, shedding the layers of trauma and violence that had defined them both. Every touch was a question. "Is this okay? Are you with me?" And every response was a resounding yes. Adrian held her as if she were made of glass, yet with the strength of steel. He kissed the scars on her soul and the bruises on her skin, worshiping the resilience that had kept her alive. And Reina, lying in the arms of the man who had destroyed his world to save her, finally let go. She let herself be held. She let herself be loved. It was the most terrifying thing she had ever done, and it was the only thing that made sense. The morning sun brought a crisp, blinding clarity to the mountains. Adrian left the cabin at dawn, leaving Reina sleeping soundly for the first time in days. He drove a borrowed truck down the winding service road to a roadside diner that sat on the border of 3 counties. He sat in the back booth, a untouched coffee in front of him. At 8 o'clock, a man in a beige windbreaker slid into the seat opposite him. Agent Miller looked like an accountant, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the diner for threats. "You look like hell, Moretti," Miller said. "I had a busy night," Adrian replied, his voice devoid of humor. "The city is a war zone," Miller said, leaning in. "We are preparing RICO indictments for half the syndicate." "But we need the head. We need you." Adrian reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a thick, terrifyingly heavy manila envelope. He slid it across the table. Miller looked at it, then at Adrian. "What is this?" "Everything," Adrian said. "Ledgers, routes, the names of the judges on Marco's payroll, the location of the bodies my predecessors buried, evidence that will put Marco Vescari and every rival crew leader in federal prison for the rest of their natural lives. Miller placed his hand on the envelope, stunned. Why? You could have used this to leverage immunity. You could have run. I am done running, Adrian said, and I am done ruling. This is the deal. Miller, I give you the keys to the kingdom. I give you Marco. In exchange, I want 2 clean identities, new names, new histories, and relocation to a state where no one has ever heard the name Moretti. Witness protection? Miller asked. No, Adrian said firmly. I don't want you watching me. I want to disappear. You scrub our files, you give us the papers, and we vanish. You get the biggest bust in Northbridge history. I get a life. Miller opened the envelope, glancing at the first few pages. His eyes widened. It was the roadmap to dismantling organized crime in the state. Okay, Miller said, closing the envelope. But there is one loose end. Marco Vescari. He's still out there. If he catches wind of this... He won't, Adrian said, because I am going to hand him to you personally. The handover was set for midnight at the old St. Jude's churchyard on the edge of the industrial district. It was a desolate place, overgrown with weeds, dominated by a neon cross from the motel next door that flickered with a maddening, buzzing rhythm. Buzz, click, darkness, buzz. Raina sat in the rental car 3 blocks away, her heart hammering against her ribs. She watched through binoculars, her hands shaking. Adrian had told her to stay back, to be ready to drive if things went wrong, but she couldn't look away. She saw Adrian standing by the crumbling stone archway of the cemetery gate. He was alone. He wore a long coat, his hands empty and visible. A convoy of black SUVs rolled up the street, their headlights cutting through the fog. Marco Vescari stepped out of the lead vehicle. His arm was in a sling from where Adrian had shot him, and his face was twisted into a rictus of hate. 10 men fanned out behind him, weapons drawn. You have some nerve, Adrian, Marco shouted, his voice echoing off the gravestones. Coming here alone. Did you think you could talk your way out of this? You have nothing left. I have the one thing you never understood. Marco, Adrian called back, his voice steady and calm. I know when to walk away. Walk away? Marco laughed, signaling his men to advance. You are not walking anywhere. You die here, and then I go find your girl. Adrian didn't flinch. He didn't reach for a weapon. He simply raised his hands in the air. Now, Adrian shouted. The trap sprung, but it wasn't bullets from the shadows. Floodlights blinded the cemetery from every angle. Sirens wailed, erupting from the side streets, the motel parking lot, the alleyways. Federal agents, drop your weapons! Dozens of armored tactical officers swarmed the perimeter. Helicopters roared overhead, their spotlights pinning Marco and his men to the muddy ground. Marco spun around, wild-eyed, realizing too late that he had walked into a net cast by the very system he thought he owned. He tried to raise his gun, but a sniper round kicked the dirt at his feet. Drop it! Marco dropped the gun. He fell to his knees, defeated not by a rival gangster, but by the law he had mocked. Adrian stood still in the center of the chaos, the wind whipping his coat around his legs. He watched as the agents cuffed Marco, dragging him toward the waiting vans. He watched the dismantling of the world he had ruled. Agent Miller walked up to Adrian, flanked by 2 officers. He held a folder in his hand. It is done, Miller shouted over the noise of the rotors. Marco is in custody. The evidence you gave us is already being processed. He handed Adrian the folder. Your new lives. Don't make me regret this. Moretti. The name is not Moretti anymore, Adrian said, taking the folder. He turned and walked away. He walked through the police lines, past the flashing lights, into the darkness where Raina was waiting. She burst out of the car as he approached. She didn't care who saw. She ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck. Adrian caught her, lifting her off her feet, burying his face in her shoulder. His hands, the hands that had held guns and signed death warrants, were shaking, but they were empty, and they were free. It is over, he whispered into her ear. Raina, it is over. 6 months later. The house was small, a single-story craftsman with a porch that looked out over the foothills of the Cascades. The air smelled of pine needles and rain, crisp and clean. Raina sat on the porch swing, a mug of tea in her hands. She watched the sun dip below the tree line. She had spent the morning in the city, an hour away, talking to a therapist who specialized in trauma. It was hard work, some days. She still jumped when a door slammed, some nights. She still woke up, gasping for air, but the intervals between the fear were getting longer. The sound of a power saw whirred from the detached garage, then cut off. A moment later, Adrian emerged. He was wearing jeans covered in sawdust and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He wiped his hands on a rag as he walked toward the porch. He looked different. The tension that had lived in his shoulders for 20 years was gone. He looked younger. He looked like a man who built things, not a man who destroyed them. He was working as a custom furniture maker, his hands finding a new language in the grain of oak and cherry wood. He walked up the steps and sat next to her on the swing. He didn't say anything, just rested his arm along the back of the seat, his fingers brushing her shoulder. Raina leaned into him, closing her eyes. "I had a flashback today," she said quietly. "In the grocery store. A man was yelling at the cashier. It sounded like Marco." Adrian's hand stilled on her shoulder, then resumed a slow, comforting stroke. "Did you use your grounding?" "I did," she said. "I counted the tiles on the floor. I breathed, but for a second, I felt like I was back in that chair." She turned to look at him. His eyes were the same dark, intense eyes that had captivated her in the bar, but the shadows behind them were gone. "I'm still scared sometimes," she admitted. "I still feel like the other shoe is going to drop. I feel like I can't trust the peace." She looked down at her hands, then at his. His hands were rougher now, calloused from work, dusted with wood shavings. "I don't trust anyone," she whispered, the old mantra slipping out, soft as a ghost. Adrian shifted. He stepped off the swing and moved to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He crossed his hands over hers, enveloping them completely in his warmth. He rested his chin on the top of her head. The sun had vanished, leaving them in the twilight, safe in the silence of their own making. "Then just trust my hands tonight," he repeated, the words a vow that had survived the fire, the war, and the darkness. Raina looked down at their interlaced fingers. She felt the strength in his grip, the steadiness that had never faltered. Not once. Since the moment he pulled her out of that alley, she felt the calluses of a builder. She felt the heartbeat of the man who chose her. She squeezed his fingers, leaning her head back against his shoulder. "I do," she whispered. And in the quiet of the mountains, far from the neon lights of Northbridge, that was enough. Thank you so much for listening to the final chapter of Adrian and Raina's story. It has been an emotional journey writing this tale of trust, redemption, and love born in the darkest of places. I hope you enjoyed the ride as much as I enjoyed crafting it. I would love to hear your thoughts on the ending. Did Adrian make the right choice? Where are you listening from today? Please leave a comment below in English sharing your location and your favorite moment from the story. If you enjoyed this series, please make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories so you never miss an upload. Your support means the world to me. Until next time, stay safe and keep believing in the power of trust.